Good morning and Merry Christmas. It is December 1st today. I can't believe that. That's kind of crazy. Thanks for joining us. We'll let people kind of trickle in. You'll notice we're kind of in a different setting, kind of celebrating the holidays already, having a cup of coffee. We got some people coming in. If you guys could type in where you're coming from and let us know that you can hear us well. And I'd love to know, what's your favorite Christmas song? Type in the box what your favorite Christmas song is. I'd love to hear that. Yeah. But as we're doing that, what is y'all's favorite Christmas carol? Angel and Sarah, what's your favorite?
Oh, I love, like, for serious ones, I love Holy Night.
Oh yeah, that's
Holy Night,
beautiful.
it's so beautiful.
That's great. That's great.
So, not because it's my name, but mine is called The Littlest Angel.
Okay. Okay.
Bing Crosby. I'm a big Crosby Christmas fan.
Yeah. That's awesome. So you can write that in the Q&A box. Yes. Thanks so much. Oh, I Want a Hippopotamus for Christmas. Oh, that's such a great Christmas song. Thank you so much. That's great. Yeah, so in the Q&A box, right where you're coming in from, where you're tuning in from, maybe the name of your organization. We're just so happy to have you today. We're going to be talking about storytelling, and what a great way to tell stories, sometimes through Christmas carols or through Christmas stories and things like that. Let's see, Jingle Bell Rock, Oh Holy Night. Oh, these are great. We got people coming in from, oh my gosh, all over Missouri, Fort Worth, what is that? Colorado Springs. Oh, this is so great. St. Louis, Missouri. Oh, that's so great.
That's cool.
Well, awesome. Well, we're so glad you guys are joining us today. I'm Lacey Young. You guys have seen me on these webinars before. I'm a senior consultant for mission advancement here in DFW, and I'm joined by Angel De Leon, Vice President of Mission Advancement in the DFW area, and Sarah Wise, Executive Consultant in the Houston office. And we're just happy to talk about stories today. So you guys know a little bit about Mission Advancement, but just in case you're new to us, we want to talk about relationships all the time. And we know that your mission is worth advancing. And advancing that mission takes more than just passion, right? It takes building relationships. And to do that, you got to work at it. And so we want to make sure that you're putting these lasting relationships into work so that you can get that impact that's lasting. And that's what we do. We work with organizations who have, strategic goals or initiatives and major fundraising needs to help them get there to advance their mission. And that's what we do. And we do it through relationship-based fundraising.
That's right.
Right? So, it's a season of giving. We're starting December. It's exciting. We've got Christmas coming up. We've got a little Christmas kind of scene here for us today.
What's his name, by the way?
His name, oh gosh.
I think I came up with Sven.
Sven.
Sven works.
Sven's our guy here. Awesome. Well, so I know that whenever I think of Christmas, when I think of kind of the greatest story ever told, right? I think back to sitting around a fireplace with my family, specifically my grandfather, telling the night before Christmas the story and reading the book. However, in my family, it was the Cajun night before Christmas. Okay.
Nice.
My family's from New Orleans originally. And so instead of Santa being led by reindeer, it was by alligator.
Yeah.
And it's just, all the jokes that you can possibly think of are part of
this one.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so what makes stories kind of so impactful that you remember them, right? Or that they can be told over and over and over again? There's some components of that, right? And that's what we're going to talk about today, is what makes stories compelling, what makes stories want to be told over and over and over again. Do you guys have any special Christmas stories that resonate with you, either books that you read as a child or to your children over the holidays?
Well, so the song I referenced earlier, it's actually a children's book.
Okay.
And it became a song. But so your question was, what makes stories special? They're emotional. Stories are, they reinforce a value that we feel that we have. And I love that story because basically the value is that this little 4-year-old angel who felt inferior in heaven when the birth of Jesus was announced, what he wanted to give was this little box that had insignificant worldly things to everyone else, but to him, they were treasures. And that's what he gave. And that was a gift that was most valued by God in the end. And
I love that.
It's a reminder to me anyway, that those little simple things that we tend to underestimate so often are so critical and so valuable.
Yeah, that's great. What about you, Sarah?
It made me think of one of my favorite Christmas movies, It's a Wonderful Life. And it's just always such a kind of similar, just a great example of just remembering what's important and that you really do touch a lot of lives and you don't even know it. And I think it's about our work and also the relationships we have with our clients, but then also just all the people we encounter on a daily basis and how important that is. And we don't even realize.
Yeah.
So it's always a sweet one, always makes me cry every time. How many hundreds of times I've seen it. But I think the thing about what makes a story good is that human experience. You know, it's sharing that human experience and something that you can identify with and enjoy. And I just think there's so many, you know, great stories for this time of year. Whether it's, you know, the movies that we love, the stories we read, you know, there's, you know, so many sweet little Christmas books that I used to read to my son that I, you know, still pull out because they're just darlings.
That's great.
But it's fun. But
That's
I think
awesome.
it's that shared experience.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, great. Thank you guys so much.
And the hero isn't always the person you expect.
Oh, yeah.
You know, sometimes it's the surprise.
Yeah.
And that's just something to.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk a lot about heroes here in a minute, heroes of the story. But if you're just now joining us, we've got a bunch of people that have joined in the past couple of minutes. We're going to be talking about storytelling today, and we figured what a better way to do that than just to sit and talk about stories and tell stories to each other and to you guys. And so we'd love for you guys to think of some stories as well. We'd love to interact with you through this webinar, and especially at the end with some Q&A. So use the Q&A box as you have questions about what we're talking about. Please type them in. We will leave some time to answer those at the end of the webinar. As always, we will have this recorded and we will send it to you. It'll also live in the resources hub on our website. So you can share it with your colleagues, with your board members, with anyone as you're thinking of, man, how do we tell our story in a more compelling way? So as I said, we're kicking off the season of giving, right? The season of that spirit of Christmas, which a lot of times people correlate that to gifts. We know that, I know I've received in the mail, you guys have too, and I bet you guys all have as well, hundreds of solicitations over the past, 30 days, right? We're in end of year giving. And I know most of you guys are prepping your end of year appeals. But we want to tell stories that are impactful and make it a little bit different. So let's talk about what that looks like. How do we tell our stories and who do we tell our stories to? But more importantly, who tells our stories, right? It doesn't need to just be us, right? The leader of an organization. So Angel, I'd love for you to kick things off kind of talking about who is it that our organizations that are watching us today, be it a nonprofit, a mission, a school, who is their customer? Who do they tell their stories to? And what does that look like?
Yeah, well, let me just say, I love that we're doing this. Yeah. For all of us in professional fundraising world, there's an art and there's a science. And the science matters, it's important, it's proven. The art sometimes gets minimized because it's, a little subjective and maybe a little soft, but I believe that's where the magic really happens in the end. And so I love that we're having this kind of conversation today. It fits so well with the season, but you're right. We do have two customers, for any nonprofit, there's a customer of the people they serve who benefits from the services that they provide. And that matters. So a homeless shelter, those individuals that benefit from that, they value that every day when they have a warm meal or a place to stay. Children's Advocacy Center, those children benefit from those services, schools, whatever it is. And a lot of times that becomes our primary driver and focus is that, and that matters. It really is important. But there's another side to that, which is our second customer, and that's our donor. And sometimes they get taken for granted or neglected, and we assume that they just show up. On Giving Tuesday, or they show up at year end, or they show up around annual fund time for appeals. And so that becomes a really important customer for all of us in our world. And every one of those customers is worthy of attention. They're worthy of a story. And a lot of times their story is unique and very specific to the things that they're passionate about and that they love. So the onus is on us. And actually the challenge is, how do we connect them to those things deeper? And a lot of times that is through story, bring them through that process, through that journey.
Okay, yeah, that's great. So the people who you're talking about, that second set of donor, the second customer, the donor, what is it that we can help our nonprofits that are watching today think of? How do we craft a mission for them? How do we craft direction for them? And even within that group, are there different segments within that of how they talk to them? What does that look like? Talk about that a little bit.
So, yes. So every donor is a person,
Mhm.
which means that they have a personality, they have interests, they have passions.
Mhm.
And, I really believe that one of the things that is helpful for all of us in our fundraising world is to be really good students of people
Mhm.
and understand what is it that makes them excited.
Mhm.
We all know that every gift is an emotional response to something. They felt compelled to do something for a reason. And our opportunity is to reconnect them to that emotion. So how do we do that in year 2 after their gift? How do we reconnect them to? And so maybe it's, would you join me as we distribute toys that you help purchase for students, underprivileged kids, or whatever the cause may be, to bring them into that, make them a partner with you in that. And now they're not just a donor, but they're actually an advocate with you. They rolled up their sleeves. They became a part of fulfilling the mission, which is really where I think the most impactful experience is for them.
Yeah, that's great. Sarah, can you speak into this a little bit of what it might look like for organizations to kind of create that second mission, to be able to both honor the first mission, but not neglect the people that fund it?
Well, I think we do this a lot with our clients and working to actually craft a second mission statement. Sometimes, and obviously our first mission statement is the core. That's why we exist. That's what we do. And that is the fundamental most important thing about our organizations. But it's also important to have that second mission statement and really understand what's the purpose of our work that we are doing with our supporters, with our donors. And it doesn't have to be a really onerous task. I think a lot of times we hear the word mission statement and we get a little, kind of locked up of like, oh my goodness, it's going to take us so long to figure this out. But a lot of our clients can do it just in a group meeting, over a few minutes and coming up with, a nice example of, what it is. And it could be something as simple as like inspiring our donors to impact our mission, or, it doesn't have to be something really crazy. But it's something that be easy to remember and something that you can pull out regularly and remember why we're doing the work. And it's not just development, and we'll get to that in a minute. So it's not just development's job to work with the donors.
That's right. Very true.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we think of the different types of customer that each of our nonprofits, that each of you guys have, is there may be a different story, there may be a different lens that you're looking through. And even if you have a specific project, there may be one thing that somebody really wants to know about. So let's find out what they love and tell them that in a really specific way. So we've talked a little bit about kind of, who the customer is, what that looks like. I want to go into next, really looking at who tells that. A lot of times we think, and we have a lot of executive directors, CEOs, heads of schools, development directors, advancement directors on here. And yes, that is your job. That's in your job description. You are the primary fundraiser. But who else can tell the story?
Well, I think it's everybody. And we say this all the time that, development obviously has assigned staff or a person or multiple people that do development, but everybody in your organization should be locked into what's going on with your donors and be prepared and able and ready to be advocates and to tell those stories. I think that, we just don't always do that well, unfortunately. I think sometimes we take it for granted when we're sitting in our organizations all the time and we know our stories inside and out, but we're not always good about telling the stories to our donors and doing that in sometimes more creative ways. And I think sometimes we get stuck. We get stuck with kind of telling the story the same old way. Your annual fund message every year is the same thing. And sometimes we take it for granted that people understand what our annual giving needs are and why do we need annual giving. And I think that sometimes we just get stuck. And, I hear a lot of times like, let's give to us. We're awesome. Just give. We're awesome.
Just give.
And that's not going to cut it. And it doesn't cut it. So I think that, really utilizing all of your resources in the organization. So it's everybody from, who's answering the phones to your volunteers, program directors. I know there's some of you here that are program directors and y'all are the rock stars of your organization. Everybody who's on the front lines of the mission, at schools, the teachers, that's who people want to talk to. And we're just the messengers here of trying to connect people with the rock stars of the organization. So I think we need to remember and pump up our colleagues who are on the front lines of the mission to remind them of how important they are. And building that culture of philanthropy.
That's such a great point, Sarah, because sometimes development department or team or advancement feels like they're on an island. We're the only ones that know the urgency and the importance of it. And having an avenue where everyone can appreciate that you are in fundraising. Doesn't matter what you do. You might be the receptionist, you're the first impression. You might be the person who, does behind the scenes things, but there's some interaction with donors in some way. And that's the challenge, is how do we get there?
Right.
Where we have a voice in being able to say, all of you matter to us, like to the organization.
Yeah, that's great. So what's an example of how should we gather stories? How should development directors, CEOs, heads of schools, how should they ask their team? What does that look like to gather stories from other people? What might that look like?
It's always a struggle. I think that, we talk about this all the time of like, let's tell each other stories. If something awesome happens on your campus or, in your organization or with a client, tell the story to development, share those things, let everybody know what's going on. I think sometimes we just get so busy that we don't stop to do this kind of work. And I think it's so important. But the biggest thing is to establish that culture of philanthropy for your organization. And this happened for me at a place that I worked at several years ago. Because when we arrived, just the culture of the organization was very siloed, and the development office was very much, they thought they were the party people who threw parties, and that's all they did. And they didn't understand what development was about. And there wasn't a lot of communication back to the other departments either about what's going on and why do we need them to help on a tour? Why do we need, their assistance with a donor event? There wasn't a lot of communication back and forth. And I think sometimes we just take it for granted that people understand why we need them. But so we did an actual strategic effort over 2 years of specifically targeting different departments and different colleagues and building relationships with them. And we, for those of us who had portfolios, we actually put specific colleagues in our portfolios. We assigned them out and we said, okay, I'm going to work on that relationship with so-and-so.
So you were cultivating them.
We were cultivating our colleagues. And I know it sounds a little cheesy, but it really did help to be more strategic on it, because we really focused in on certain relationships. And over time, it really did change things. We finally were starting to have conversations with people that they understood what we were doing in development, and they came to us with ideas, or they came to us with stories where we said, hey, this just happened, I think you need to know. Or, hey, I remember that donor that you brought on the tour the other day that really loved X, here's some more information on this. I mean, and the only way that started to happen though was by opening the channels of communication. And development can't just expect that everybody gets it. You really have to reach out. And so we're all about relationships. And so that's what we have to do. We have to reach out and create those relationships within our organizations.
That's so great.
It really does work.
Putting your own colleagues in your portfolio and checking in with them regularly. That's so great.
Having plans for actually talking to them and creating that relationship.
Right. Because sometimes we don't want a program's staff or director to feel like, oh, I've always got to be sending development stories, and we know this happens when development might say, oh, we want to send something out. Give me a story right now. Give me a story right now. Oh gosh, well, we have some things, but I want to talk a little bit about what happens in organizations, which many of the organizations on the webinar today and that we work with, confidentiality. They really can't tell the exact story. And, if we're dealing with children, or if we're working with a women's shelter or something that's a little bit harder to tell that specific story, how can a program director, a CEO tell that story still in an impactful way with keeping confidentiality for clients? Have you seen that?
Yeah. I don't know if you've seen it. We've worked with, a women's shelter and domestic violence organization, several organizations like that, where you just can't you just can't reveal who these people are for their safety and their confidentiality. And that creates a barrier sometimes between the donor and the client, because you really can't have donors meeting the clients.
Right.
In that way. And so that creates that barrier. And so there's a lot of organizations, I know some of you are going, well, that may be easy for so-and-so organization, but our organization, we can't. But what we did with them is we said, you have real stories, but you can change the name. Just change the name and just say, you know, client A, you know, name has been changed or whatever. And everybody understands why you have to keep that confidential, but you can still do the basic facts of the story and get across that impact. Or they can write a letter or a short little note and just talk about their experience, and you can publish it, you know, online or wherever you're doing sharing these stories, but without revealing who they are. And I think that, you know, you just have to get a little creative and not get so boxed into doing things exactly like other organizations do.
Great point. Yeah, I mean, those are practical restrictions that you have in those cases. But you're right, you can tell the story. You can tell the story of impact. This is how we've been able to impact families, or, you know, whatever the organization is. You can quantify that in some way and still make it emotional, maybe by changing names or, you know, not revealing the identity of the individuals. But there is that importance of, and donors will understand that, you know, if they're passionate about that organization, they probably understand the nuances that are necessary there. So there's a way to do that. And that's a great idea of just maybe changing a name and making it where you can still tell the emotional piece of the story.
Another thing that they did that was really great is working with donors to at this time of year, at Christmas time, they would have them bring gifts and ideas, you know, and things for the clients. And they would have them bring it to their little Christmas store. Well, the clients wouldn't shop during that time, but they would drop off their gifts. And so it was an opportunity to interact face to face with their donors. And so they would have staff there. They would talk about how meaningful these gifts were going to be for the clients. And so that was a way to still interact with donors. And they weren't interacting with clients, but they were seeing, you know, the store getting set up and all these things getting dropped off. And they knew that these clients were going to be able to shop and enjoy. So that's another way you can kind of still have some interaction without, you know, with still you know, maintaining that confidentiality.
I know another thing that sometimes, and I think many of our, you know, viewers today are thinking is our stories are really hard to tell. And, you know, Sarah, you mentioned this earlier, our story can't be, hey, we're doing great work, give us money. Sometimes the story is, we're dealing with a really hard thing. And, you know, we work with many organizations who sometimes even their board is like, please don't tell me the story because it hurts my heart, because it's sad. And we love the fact that those organizations are doing that. They're going on the front lines. They're getting in there if it's with, you know, abuse or sex trafficking or something. But I had someone once, and they did this as a card, but it was a way to tell a story in a way that protected the child, but also told the story that was a really hard story in an impactful way. And they had, during some of these kind of therapy sessions, where a child would draw instead of talk. This child didn't want to talk. And it was just like a bunch of dark crayon, just dark, gray and black. And then was like a little flower.
Wow.
And it was like, so they did that. We had them put it on a card, and not just in a letter. It was a card that opened up with a handwritten thing that just said, you know, didn't say the name of a child, but said, this is an example of what it looks like for a child to tell their story in a different way.
That is awesome.
Isn't that beautiful? And so they're able to say, like, that little flower was hope, I think. And I think that, you know, we can't put ourselves in the shoes all the time. Our donors definitely can't put themselves in the shoes all the time of what that looks like. But to be able to show someone, your gift is helping this be possible when it's a really hard story to tell.
I love that.
I think that that's really important for us to remember, is because we were talking in the beginning about what stories impact us. And it's about emotion and human experience. And I think there is a way for us to talk about hard things, and do it in a sensitive, beautiful way, like that, or and not be afraid, though, to really connect our donors with what's going on with our mission and with our clients. So I think that that's something to remember. I think the other thing on the flip side is, I hear sometimes some clients go, well, you know, that's easy for a homeless shelter to come up with, you know, an impactful story, but, you know, we're a school. And so it's, you know, what do we do? So I think that you see that on both sides of the spectrum of people people going, well, our stories are hard, or I don't feel like our stories are that,
Hard enough.
Not a charity per se.
Right.
And so it's really trying to come to, ultimately, you really have to find something that's compelling, to your audience. And, your donors care about your organization.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
They're not just strangers, so they're already connected to you. And I think it's, bringing out those elements of what makes your organization special. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the huge hard story either, but it's figuring out where is that emotion in the mission of what you're doing, and what's going to really impact people.
That's so great. So I want to kind of piggyback off of that and kind of go into a little bit of, we've talked a little bit about who we tell the story to, right? The customers, and it might be different. It actually needs to be different, right? And then who's telling them, but how do we do it? How do we craft it? And we talked a little bit about, what's compelling, how do we tell the story in a way, but how do we really sit down and say, okay, guys, we need to gather a bunch of stories. How do we put it together? Because we need to make sure that it is special for that donor. We also need to make sure that we have something that's general enough that we can send out in an annual appeal, in an end of year letter. So what does that look like to build a case for support and to put that story together? What does that look like? You can start with whatever.
Yeah. So I tease my wife around this time of year. My wife's a big, am I allowed to say Hallmark Channel?
Yeah, I think so.
Hallmark Channel Christmas movies.
Yeah.
She will watch them all day on weekends, and I tease her. I'm not anti-Christmas stories on Hallmark, but I tell her they're all predictable. It's a young lady who's carrying, a bag of Christmas gifts. A handsome young man knocks it over. They meet. That night they meet at a cocktail party or a Christmas party, and it's you again. And the relationship builds, and then there's a crisis point. He gets cold feet, and she goes off despondent back to her town, and he realizes he made a huge mistake. He runs to the airport, talks the gate agent to let him in, and he intercepts her before she gets on the plane, and we all make up the rest of the great story. They're all really predictable, but they're all emotional. And that's your point, Sarah, is that every story needs to have those elements. It has to happen in a place. It has to happen with a person or people. There's a plot that develops. There's a pinch point. Crisis happens, and then there's some kind of resolution to that. And so, we have a whiteboard back here. We could sketch out a story of how we want to take a donor on that kind of journey. And to the point earlier, every one of them is a little bit different, and they all have a different, they resonate with different things. And so that's, I think, part of crafting that story for us is it's just the creative act of providing an opportunity for a donor to reconnect. What is the why? Let's remind them of what that why is, and doing it in a impactful way. I think is a gift. It's a generous gesture that we can do on behalf of a donor to help them relive that once again.
I want to dive a little bit deeper into the elements of a story. And we've talked about this before, and we've done a couple of webinars and even workshops on just this, right? Just what are the elements of storyboarding, looking at the characters, the setting, the plot, the conflict, the resolution. I want to talk a little bit about plot and conflict more. When we're doing this, how is it, and Sarah can give us a couple of examples of when you're getting people around a table, you're getting your team around a table to do this, when you look at their plot, and then that's usually where you find out what their conflict is, like what their burden is, what they love. And then what does that look like to find out someone's journey, and then to identify there has to be a conflict in this. What does that look like?
Well, I think the word conflict denotes, a lot of people think of it as a negative word, and it really isn't. It's trying to figure out what is the problem or the core issue that your organization is trying to solve, and really drilling down to that. And I think sometimes, again, I'm repeating myself, but I feel like this is so common that we just take it for granted that our donors understand this. And I think we really need to be explicit about reminding them of what is the conflict we are trying to solve. And every organization, no matter who you are, has some sort of fundamental problem or thing that you are trying to solve. And really drilling down to that, and using characters, whatever it is, if it's clients, you know, or made up clients, whatever it is, of trying to tell this story. But I think we do actually a terrible job in the nonprofit sector of doing this, because I think we just, again, think that everybody understands who we are and what we do. And especially with our annual giving, you know, I think with annual giving, sometimes it's just not as, you know, with capital needs, it's much more specific, and it's a little bit easier to wrap your story around.
More attractive.
Yeah, it's, you know, just more specific and tangible. But with annual giving, it's sometimes not quite as tangible. And I just see a lot of people struggling, you know, with that. And I was actually just working with a client literally yesterday on their story that they're putting in their end of year letter. And we kind of, you know, said, oh, time out, like, let's make this a little more specific, because we're being too vague. And I think a lot of times we are too vague, that it's, you know, just goes to some sort of amorphous annual fund that does some sort of amorphous, weird, you know, vague thing. And we're not being specific with our donors. And I think that the more tangible we can get, the better.
And it's going to be different. Not different, the crisis or the problem is different. The way we position it might be different. It might be more aligned with a particular donor's interests or passions or the things that they want to solve. You know, because the crisis, the assumption is there's a resolution to that. There's a way to fix this, or there's a way to make it better. And that's a donor to donor conversation, and that's where the creativity.
Well, and then how can we make the donor the hero of the story? So, you know, you're talking about the Hallmark Christmas movies and all of that, you know, that it's so standard and, you know, cut and dry, you know, all the different, which the plots are pretty similar.
They're the same. They're all the same.
Small town, big city thing. Anyway. But I think that it's just so important to think about how when you're doing stories for major donors specifically, and you're narrowing in on how can the donor be the hero of this story, how can they help you solve this problem? Donors want to solve problems. They want to be a part of the solution, and we really need to get more specific when we're talking with donors about what is that, what does that mean, what does it look like? And I just think that we need to not be afraid to really drill down to those tangible examples.
And when we think about kind of the end of that, the resolution piece, and both of you spoke to this of, you know, that there is a problem to solve and we want them to solve it. There may be a short-term resolution that's you get a gift and they want to learn more and they're in, but what does their long-term resolution maybe look like? What does it look like for a donor to really fall in love with your mission? Because we know, especially for annual, we're going to ask them again next year. Right. So how do you keep that going? What does it look like to actually, part of their resolution is not just thanking them. What does it look like to really get somebody into the fold in their resolution of their story?
So I have an example of that. So I was development officer at a school prior to being here, and annual funds are always hard to raise, particularly in the school, because there's some assumptions. For those of you in the school world, you appreciate tuition takes care of everything, and it doesn't always do that. They were hard dollars to raise, and so we had a particular grandparent who was a faithful annual fund donor, and we were always struggling with how do we make it attractive? How do we, you know, what are the stories behind that? And one year, the 6th grade class was studying space, outer space, and they did this is back a few years, Skype, with a real U.S. astronaut who was about to launch into the space station. And he was in Russia, and he was Skyped in, and all the 6th graders were sitting in this room with a computer monitor and a microphone, and they could go and ask the astronaut questions. Well, we invited this granddad who gave to the annual fund every year to attend. One of his grandchildren was in that group. And in the process, we told him, by the way, your annual fund gift helped make this possible. Well, it became tangible for him at that point. Now, it would have still happened without him, but for him, it meant something that we connected the dots for him. it was a great event, simple event, but for him, watching his granddaughter in that room,
Wow.
being able to walk up and grab a microphone and ask an astronaut in Russia a question was a really cool thing. So
Yeah.
we don't always, it isn't always teed up that easily,
Right.
but it was like a gimme. We had to just, by the way, this is.
But
what
you've
done.
actually connected the dots. Not everybody thinks to connect the dots. So
Right.
sometimes there are things happening, you know,
Yeah.
in your organization that you're already doing
Right.
that are
Right.
made possible technically by annual giving.
Yeah.
And so you just have to communicate that message
Yeah.
to your donors.
Yeah. That's awesome.
That's, you know,
Yeah.
made possible.
Oh, I love that. So kind of what you described, Angel, is what we call a transformational donor experience.
Mhm.
Okay. And so many of you have heard us use this term before, is that's what we want to create. We want to show a donor how their gift is transforming the organization. We also want to transform the donor's life at the same time.
Mhm.
So I want to talk about transformational donor experiences and kind of give some examples similar to what Angel did, but how we've done that with different types of donors and with different types of people helping like tell the story. So can you give an example, Sarah, of a great transformational donor experience, kind of from start to finish, of how it was planned, who was on that team to plan it, and then what did it look like and who was involved in the actual experience?
Yeah. Well, I'm actually going to steal an example, I think, that came from your previous, place, but I love the story of the capital campaign experience with the new middle school. So this is a school example, but I think that the one thing that I would say is getting a whiteboard like this board behind us and just getting out the markers and putting the donor's name on there and saying, okay, where are we going? Where's the destination for this donor? You know, if the goal is a significant gift, let's just say $1 million gift, you know, for this capital campaign. Well, how are we going to get there? And what are the steps that we need to do in order to get there? Because chances are it's going to be multiple steps.
Right.
Hopefully it's not just one.
Who's all in the room for that when you're doing that?
Well, I think you have to get the right people
Okay.
in the room and not too many people. So that's one thing. If there's too many people, then it gets too cumbersome. But I would say the people who interact with the donor and then your volunteers, if you have a campaign leadership committee,
Okay.
People who know of them, know things about them. So internal and, sometimes external is always really helpful.
Great.
Leadership, whoever needs to be in the room to speak about that donor and what you know about them, or what others may know about them. Because what we're trying to do is figure out who they are, what they like, what are their passions, what are their interests, and then go from there. And then tie them and connect them to the compelling need that you have, and communicating that compelling need.
Okay.
So in that case, and I think, and Angel, correct me, because I think I just love telling this story to donors when we're trying to start transformational donor engagements and experiences and tell them like how we do this. But the need was the new middle school, I believe.
Correct.
And I think this was maybe for the lead gift, if I recall. And so they basically came up with an experience to bring them through the school and to see what the need was, to experience the need, that it was cramped, that they didn't have the space.
Right.
So
As a middle schooler.
as a
right?
middle schooler.
Yeah.
So they gave them a locker. And so when they arrived, they went to the locker and they had to get the combination, and all the kids are moving through the halls and it's chaotic and everything, but they got their schedule and that had, where they were going to go for the morning. And they were going to these different spots throughout the middle school that really demonstrated the need, the need for new labs, the need for this. And then they ended up went to a classroom at the end, and there were kids in there and, administrators that, were talking about what would a new middle school mean to them. And again, not that much effort really to make that whole thing happen.
Yeah.
Right.
But it was a more creative, immersive way of communicating the need instead of just sitting down and saying, well, we need a new middle school because we're out of space. They actually experienced it. And so I think that that's, something that an example I tell a lot of our clients to say, here's how you can do something like this. And it doesn't have to be extravagant, but it is immersive and it is something that, really brings, the need front and center to them.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. And I love that story too, not just because I was there, that's what happened, but the transformation in the donor. And so this couple really went through, they felt the need. They got to experience the need as they walked, as you said, Sarah, to different parts of where they were doing middle school at the time. and they got to see firsthand the challenges of that. So there's the crisis.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And eventually they began to see themselves as the problem solver.
Mm.
And so, you know, at the end of the day, when they made that gift, and I've told this story, several weeks after they made the lead gift, they said, I would like to tell you why we made this gift, because it's the largest gift we've ever made to a school like this. And they said, one, we trust that this mission is a worthy mission. They said, we believe this middle school building will help you do that better. And then they said, we trust leadership. And those three pieces were so critical. For me, I was like a sponge. I was like, wow, they just opened their brain and more, they opened their heart and let us take a peek into what motivated this.
That's great.
Could that have happened without that experience? I don't know.
Yeah.
I do know it did not hurt
Right.
that we did that.
Right.
It took some time, as you said,
Yeah.
not a lot of effort,
Right.
but we wanted them to walk away and go, wow.
Yeah.
We've never been asked like that before.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
felt really good
Yeah.
to be a part of that experience.
Mhm.
So yes, we do talk a lot about transformational donors because that's where the shift happens in their thinking and their heart.
Yeah.
Again, all gifts are emotional
Right.
responses.
Right.
Sometimes it doesn't have to even be that detailed. You know, we were with a client not too long ago, maybe last year, and we were working on another capital gift, but we were all sitting around doing the storyboarding, and we were on the whiteboard, and out of the corner, you know, comes somebody who hadn't said much, said, you know, well, I remember, and this is like 20 minutes in, you know, like this wasn't at the beginning, you know, that they really loved our campus buses and they wanted to always be a bus driver one day.
Oh, wow.
And just drive the bus around campus. And we just looked and went, well, we can make that happen.
You can do that.
And,
Yeah.
and it became part of the experience. And it was a simple little thing, but that simple little thing became, you know, part of that donor's experience. And that was very personal to them.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes it can just be something that they really love, or some, you know, some little thing that just really turns that experience into something very personal.
Absolutely.
For them.
Yeah. You know, when we think about, you know, doing the storyboarding process and getting to know about a donor, I think back to Sarah, what you said of having development, having leadership also includes some of their own staff in their portfolio to learn about them. I think especially when we're looking at capital and we build a campaign leadership team, and they may be some board members, some of them might be a staff person, but usually volunteers from the outside. I always like to kind of each meeting, like find out a little something new about them, right? So every meeting is like a mini storyboarding session. And this is a few years back, but we did this, and, you know, we'd have to have some icebreakers. You know, those meetings sometimes can be, you know, kind of the same every now and again, and we want to make sure we do something fun. And we did kind of an icebreaker of, tell us, we've been meeting for a year, tell us something nobody knows about you yet. And the CEO said, you guys know everything about me. Like, you're on my board, you've been working with me for years, you know everything. And we said, well, just think about it for a minute. And then we came back and she said, you know, I've always wanted to drive a race car. And this woman always put together, beautiful, very, you know, classy lady. She's like, I've always wanted to drive a race car. Like, I'm fascinated by NASCAR. And we kind of said, oh, okay. And so a person then that was on the committee later said, I think I can maybe make that happen. I know someone who works at Texas Motor Speedway. We can maybe do, so it's like, when you find out nuggets about people, just save those. You never know if it can be for a fulfillment piece, an acknowledgement piece, or part of this transformational experience that doesn't just have to be the ask, right? Part of the transformational experience may be the way you're thanking them.
Right.
So when the middle school building is up, have those people come back. We had a client not too long ago who had a ceremony for their new building. And it was, they weren't able to truly do a groundbreaking. So they did kind of a dedication to when the slab was down, right? So the building wasn't there yet, but they were putting the slab down and they were starting, and they had their major donors sign a beam that was going to go into the foundation. And they've signed the beam. They even put a Bible in there and put the cement over it. So it was underneath the foundation of this building. Well, we had the dedication of the building being opened in the grand opening a couple of weeks ago. And they reminded, and that was a year and a half ago. And they said, oh, that's right, we did sign it. And so the donor knows my signature is in this place. Like, I'm part of this building. And it was just really beautiful. So the experience, you know, yes, it's part of the ask, but it may continue on years later as their fulfillment.
Right.
And I think one thing to remember is it doesn't have to, these transformational experiences don't have to just be, like you said, only for asking or only for gifts. It can be part of your enlisting or stewarding people. But we had, one volunteer that when they were asking her to be part of this committee, they did it in a special way. And so instead of just asking someone to be on a committee, they got a video of these kids that were part of a program that she had supported. And that program was very dear to her. And they unrolled a scroll, like a big banner, and said, will you help us? And it was darling. And, again, it took a little bit of effort to make that happen, but she was, in tears. She just thought it was awesome.
Oh, that's beautiful.
What a special way to ask somebody to be a volunteer. So I think sometimes we don't even think about making that a special effort for our people.
Oh, I love that. We could sit here and tell stories all day long, and these two know it, and many of you may know me, but I could tell a story all day, every day. So I won't get going, I promise. But I do want to kind of highlight, I wrote a couple notes as we were talking of some key takeaways that I think are really helpful. And we'll send these out to you as well. But Sarah, I loved how you said to create a culture of philanthropy, and then it starts with kind of everybody, and include people on your team, ask them questions. But I loved that, putting someone in your portfolio. So that's really key. I think that's really great. Also, I loved, diving in a little bit more. Angel, you talked about the second mission again. We have to remember that. And maybe that's something that at every development meeting, or even, at every board meeting, we talk about the development mission as well, right? Sometimes people do a mission moment at board meetings, and it's just that first mission, right? It's here's a story of a client and how we saw success. But maybe let's also remind them, now here's a story of a donor that was fulfilled through our mission. And so maybe we incorporate stuff like that. I also loved kind of, making the donor part of it, bringing in somebody for that video, like the Skype with an astronaut. I thought that was such a cool story. And then kind of lastly, that it doesn't need to just be about the ask. These experiences and storyboarding, yes, we're trying to get to that part of asking for a gift, but we know that may take months, years to get to that part. So there's a bunch of cultivation pieces, but then there's also a bunch of fulfillment and stewardship pieces, because again, we know with annual, we're going to ask them again the next year, but even with capital, we want their annual gift to grow. And so we want them to know, they're a part of this for the long run, right? So we want to think of the fulfillment part as well. So we're going to do a couple questions. Actually, Angel, will you bring the computer over so I can see them a little bit better? You guys are seeing the behind the scenes kind of the way this works in technology. But I'm going to look at some of these questions that you guys have given us, and I want to answer some of them. And it's really small. So in the process, when in the process of the story of the middle school, this is a great one. So this person's asking, when did that happen in the process? Was that at the very beginning? Was that at the end? When was that in the process of that donor's their journey, but also in the campaign? When did that happen?
So great question. And I think you said earlier, maybe it was you, Lacey, it's never a one conversation. That's a transaction.
Right.
We're looking for relationships. So in that particular case, we began speaking with them relatively early because they were the lead candidate.
Yeah.
But that did not materialize for probably 9 months.
Right.
So there was a lot of conversation and a lot of relationship building that took place in that with that particular donor. Yeah,
that's great. That's so great. So another question that we have here is, thinking about a time when maybe the story was really hard. And Sarah, you and I talked about this before. When you're telling a hard story and maybe it didn't go as planned, how do you pivot? How do you pivot if it goes awry?
I don't know. I don't know if I can think about like when it's gone awry, but
a shift.
Yeah, a shift. I think that we can't be afraid of the hard, and that there's always a way to take a hard story, a difficult situation that our clients may be experiencing, and then bring that hope and resolution at the end. So I think you never want to be like a complete downer, but the whole point of your organization hopefully is to have some sort of hope and resolution and help to these clients. So what's the positive spin on that? And, because like with all stories, there's got to be, conflict there. My son used to get really upset in movies where there'd be the conflict part of the movie because he's like, oh, I don't like this. I don't like that they're upset. It's like, well, you have to have it in order to have the resolution. So, I think we have to really be sure we're doing that.
And just being vulnerable. I think, as development or fundraising professionals, we are tour guides in a sense, and we don't have all the answers. And I think that's why the relationship is so important, because if we're in a relationship with a donor, it's okay to say, I know this is tough and I don't know the answer either.
Right.
We don't have to fix it. Our part is to bring them along in that so that they can connect at different points. But just the vulnerability of, if we have all the answers, that's a transaction. If it's, I feel this with you, and it hurts to deal with these kind of things. Now we're coming along together in this. It's a little bit different feel.
Yeah, that's great. So we have a question about like, how would this work when you're recruiting leadership? So we're talking about asking for gifts, but what would it look like for enlistment? We're still going to storyboard that. What would that look like to get someone to come on? And that may even be enlistment of a board member, not just a campaign chair. What would that look like? How would you use the storytelling kind of storyboarding process to do that?
I think that it's so important. I mean, we do, again, I don't know that we do the greatest job of telling our story to board members, even, or to potential board members. So thinking about in the recruitment process and in the onboarding process for your board members, or for, any leadership of any effort, how are we communicating that story in the lead? And I think there's some creative ways you can do that, and immerse them in the mission, and immerse them in what's going on, so that they really get it. Because, mission moments at board meetings aren't always going to do it. So, how can you really get them engaged in understanding of what's going on? So, I think there's all sorts of creative things you can do, but I think we need to get out of our box of doing things exactly the way we've always done it. Especially with, onboarding of board members, and think, what would be impactful? What would be interesting? There was one organization I was working with that was a museum, and they talked about having the board members actually go through the children's museum and interact with all the exhibits and play, and have a play period, basically, to understand how this all works, because they see all these cool exhibits, but they've never actually used them themselves. And so they wanted to have somebody, engage the board members in playing through the museum, which I thought was really, of course,
that's great.
Like a no-brainer, but like, well, duh, why haven't we done this? So I think that's important.
Yeah, that's great. So kind of one last question, and then we'll kind of wrap this up. But so you talked about people that have confidentiality issues and they can't use that. This person is saying, can we use our clients? Can we use our people? So talk about what that looks like. How do we use your clients, or if you're a school, your students, can they be a part of the story?
Yeah, so again, I think it depends on the service, the particular service that the organization provides. It's relatively easy in a school. In our case, I was always a little hypersensitive that we didn't overstep in that. We didn't want to put kids in a difficult position, and we didn't want to look hokey. So what we would do is we would be very tasteful about it and use them in an appropriate way. So the example that you shared that we did, Sarah, we just had the kids there. We didn't stage it. We didn't tell them, here's what you have to do. Hold your hands here, look perfect, and there's posture, and don't ask questions. We said, just be yourself. And they were wonderful. They were middle school kids, which is exactly what we wanted the effect to be. But we didn't feel like we were exploiting them or putting them in a position where they now became the fundraiser. They were just a layer. They were a layer in creating the experience for the donor.
I think that's the important part, is being genuine. I do think it's a no-brainer to involve, if you can, involve your, the people who receive your mission or who are impacted by your mission in your stories, and involve them in your events and your communications and anything that you do. But you've got to be genuine, and it's got to be from the heart. And if it's really staged, if it's really scripted, then that's going to come across that way. And I just think that, it may backfire on you in some cases. So, and being sensitive of making sure it doesn't look like you're using these folks, for, for your gain.
Right.
So they're human beings who, are impacted by what you all are doing as an organization. So I think that's the part to be really careful of.
But how cool would it be for a donor to receive an invitation from let's say a soup kitchen to say, would you come volunteer today? And have that donor dishing out food as customers come through. There's no exploitation. But there's no better way for them to roll up their sleeves and feel like I'm becoming part of this mission in a way other than just donating my money. We've now connected them to the real people, the real faces, the recipients of their service. I think it's a beautiful thing. It can be done really well, very tastefully. And they have the option to say, I'm just not comfortable yet. That's fine. You have an open invitation. You let me know when you're ready.
Always making sure we're bringing the donor into the mission and so they can see it in action. And when you do that, obviously we want you to be in relationship with your donors, but we want your donor to have a relationship with your mission.
That's right.
And so if they're able to see it, if they can, go and be on the street with your team, or if you have an event, or if it's volunteering, have them see what's happening. A lot of times people will say, oh, I love that organization. I give to them. Oh, I've never been there. I've never taken a tour. Have them go through. What's the experience that a woman, when they go into a shelter, what does that look like for them? Have a donor walk through that path, or a child at an advocacy center. What's the path that they take? They don't need to see the child. They don't need to be a part of it, but they can see, wow, this is a lot, right? So bringing them in is really great. Like I said, we could tell stories all day long, and we want to make sure you guys can get back to your day. We hope that this has been helpful and you've started to think about some stories that you can tell about your mission to your donors. Use your people, use everybody. If you have interns, use your interns, have them help you make fun videos or tell the story in a different way. Use the receptionist, use the person at a school who does carpool. Those people know everything about the school better than you may. Incorporate those people, have them feel part of it. Don't just run to programs and say, I need a story right now, right? We want to make sure that it's a joyful experience. We will post this on our resource hub. I'll email it to you guys tomorrow. Do not worry. But also we're excited to just be in front of you a little bit more over this holiday season. So we're going to do kind of a fun 12 days of Christmas stories of mission impact. So look for those on our social media channels, and then we'll send some emails as well. But of our client stories, of your stories, stories from past clients, current clients. We want to share the joy of this season in a way that is really genuine, because you guys are doing great things and we're so honored to be able to work with you, and we're here for any questions that you may have, and we want to get out there and meet you and see you.
Absolutely. So be on the lookout for workshops. We will be doing some of those in the Houston area, Dallas, Fort Worth area, and other areas as well. We'll promote those through our social media channels and emails, and you'll get invitations like you did for this webinar. But we're really glad you're here. We look forward to meeting you, and let us know how we can help you.
Well, thank you guys. Happy holidays. Merry Christmas. We hope you guys have a great end of the calendar year, and tell the story of your mission in a way that is genuine and special and is transformational for your donors. Thank you guys so much. Have a great one. Bye.